Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Everything around him was dark red, and a strange force surged into Huo Yuhao's body from all directions. He felt, in that moment, as if there were countless avenging spirits that were about to tear his body apart, and were about to swallow his spirit. He couldn't feel anything else around him except for all the dark red colors. Yes, this was the death god's power. Even though this wasn't its complete version, this power seemed enough to deal with him. Huo Yuhao could almost feel that his body was being torn apart by this sinister and terrifying strength, and his life energy was swiftly seeping away as his spiritual sea gradually crumbled. Am I going to die? Countless images surfaced in Huo Yuhao's mind at this moment. His mother's gentle eyes, and her yearning gaze before her death. Douluo's arrogant demeanor when she was dressed in men's clothes, and how tender she was afterwards. Father, yes, and my father. I don't know if my death will make him sad. He set his own son on a path of death with his own hands, and perhaps this is the best vengeance that he deserves. If he doesn't care. Huo Yuhao clenched his fists tightly, and the tiger's tooth pierced into his palm. However, he regretted nothing in this moment. Is everything going to end just like this? Mother, I'm coming to find you. Suddenly, an icy-cold aura rose up. Huo Yuhao had already lost all hope when he felt an incredibly strong power burst forth from his body and forcefully chase away all the avenging spirits that had invaded his body. That clean and cool feeling appeared first in his chest before it stretched over his torso, as wave of flourishing life energy took this opportunity to spurt from his body. That was the power of the life guardian blade. Scales that were as black as night swiftly covered his entire body. The dark red light had long disappeared, but Huo Yuhao hadn't been reduced to flying dust. Instead, he was plummeting down right at a mountain peak not far away. His solo battle armor had been melted away into nothingness, and all he had left at this moment was armor of black scales. Fortunately, he didn't bring out his starlight sapphire ring. This was actually the thought that had occurred to him despite his circumstances. The great star Douluo forest's lake of life. The clear and transparent lake water suddenly turned black, and an indignant dragon roar could be heard in the next moment. An enormous dragon head that was several tens of meters in diameter emerged from the lake's surface. The dragon head was as black as ink, but its eyes were bright gold. Except, there were faint traces of blood amidst all that golden radiance. Roar the dragon's maw opened as a dark red sphere erupted from within it. After this dark red sphere emerged, countless images of avenging spirits appeared in the sky as the sphere dissipated, and these avenging spirits howled in agony as the sphere vanished. The dragon's golden eyes became clear once more after it expelled this dark red sphere. So powerful. So brutal. Is this a weapon humans created with avenging spirits? Bam! Huo Yuhao's body crashed into the side of the mountain. At this moment, he seemed like he was part of the mountain, because his entire body was covered in black dragon scales. He didn't hesitate at all as he activated spiritual interference domain once more. He turned to look in Tang Wutong's direction at the same time. Huo Yuhao instantly saw, to his surprise, that an intense layer of golden light had appeared around Tang Wutong, and was pushing her body forward toward the mountainside at lightning speed. She was as fast as a shooting star. More strangely, the layer of golden light that was protecting her repelled all the soul cannon shells and soul rays that were flying toward her, and those things didn't detonate at all. What kind of power is that? It's so powerful. A soul master that was erupting with speed at all full strength could cover several hundred meters in the blink of an eye. Tang Wutong charged into the mountainside as well. Huo Yuhao immediately connected to her through spiritual detection. They didn't pause at all, but turned around and bolted toward a blind spot where the death god couldn't attack them directly. All the soul tools on the main peak stopped firing at the moment they reached the mountain, and they could no longer threaten them in any way. However, several hundred soul engineers were already racing toward the main peak, and were coming closer and closer. You're still alive? Tang Wutong grabbed his shoulder excitedly, as she saw Huo Yuhao. Even though the power of darkness emanating from the black dragon's scales made her feel uncomfortable, she couldn't be bothered with all that at this moment. Huo Yuhao cursed, laughed, and said, "Why are you cursing me to die?" Tang Wutong panted furiously for a few moments. "Nobody's cursing you. How did you do that? That power. Let's talk about that later. Let's continue with our mission." Huo Yuhao grabbed her hand. The black scales on his body were starting to disappear, but he couldn't be bothered with putting on any clothes, as he pulled Tang Wutong right toward the place on the main peak that was caved inward. He began to murmur some incantations at the same time. Dense spiritual undulations emerged from his body and circled around him. Tang Wutong felt entirely different when he held her hand this time. Huo Yuhao's hand was very warm and was very strong. She felt very safe and secure, even though they were in such a dangerous place. The scene of what had just happened had been deeply imprinted into her mind, even though she didn't know how Huo Yuhao had managed to stay alive. The armor on his body was gone, and he seemed like nothing had happened to him, but she clearly felt that he had lost all life at that moment. "He didn't hesitate to save me." The image of Huo Yuhao being enveloped in all the dark red light replayed over and over in her mind. The assault from the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineers arrived from a distance right at this moment, and everything came sweeping down. Oscillation detectors surrounded them from all positions at the same time. They were like turtles in a jar for the Sun Moon Empire. This Soul Master, who had penetrated their defenses time and time again, had given them too much trouble, and dealt far too heavy losses to them. He had even baited Wang Yiheng out and killed him. That was incredibly humiliating for the Sun Moon Empire, and they didn't believe that this Soul Master could escape from his current circumstances. Huo Yuhao stood still in a depression in the mountain, and unleashed his life-reflecting shield. He protected both himself and Tang Wutong within it, and his incantations became increasingly rushed. Huo Yuhao had to stabilize himself to complete the spell so that he could summon his spectral demiplane. Tang Wutong took the initiative and stood in front of him to protect him, as she released purple dragon-shaped light again and again, while her fifth soul ring glowed. She deflected the incoming attacks along with Huo Yuhao's life-reflecting shield. This was her fifth soul skill, Dragon God's Howl. This soul skill wasn't as powerful as her sixth soul skill, Deadly Dragon God Dance, but this soul skill could be used continuously. Huo Yuhao finally completed his spell as a flashing door suddenly appeared beside him. Just as Huo Yuhao was preparing to summon his companions from inside the spectral demiplane, Tang Wutong suddenly called out, "Hey, wait." "What?" Huo Yuhao asked confusedly. Tang Wutong didn't look at him, and her eyes had been elsewhere this entire time. However, Huo Yuhao could see from her profile that her pretty face and neck were tainted with faint red hues. "Put on some clothes." Tang Wutong's voice was very soft, but it rang loud and clear in Huo Yuhao's ears. Huo Yuhao glanced downward, and realized that all the black scales protecting him had disappeared. Then, there wasn't much else. That was called clean. This time, besides his solo battle armor, Huo Yuhao had even left the breastplate, Hongchen's blessing, that he had obtained from the illustrious virtue hallmaster, Jing Hongchen, back in the army camp. He had instructed Dai Luoli to take it if Huo Yuhao didn't return. Therefore, one could say that he had absolutely nothing on him. "I didn't bring any," Huo Yuhao said weakly. "You?" Tang Wutong's face became even redder, as she tossed a long dress back to Huo Yuhao. "Wrap this around you." "All right." Huo Yuhao couldn't be bothered with anything else, as they were in an emergency, and wrapped the dress around his waist to protect his most important parts before he summoned his companions. Silhouettes emerged swiftly from the door. Shu Sanxia took point Xuanwu's shield wall. Golden light erupted as a large patch of shields formed a defensive perimeter that protected Tang Wutong and Huo Yuhao within. Shu Sanxia was momentarily stunned when he saw Tang Wutong, before he saw Huo Yuhao, who was still wrapped in a dress. "Geez, Yuhao. We were worried about you for nothing. Are you two here on a date, or executing a mission? How have you guys fooled around until you have no clothes left? Ha ha ha." Shu Sanxia couldn't help tease Huo Yuhao as he saw the wretched shape he was in. However, his face quickly turned pale. The Sun Moon Empire's soul engineers had already surrounded them. Shusansha had deflected those formidable attacks twice with his golden Xuanwu shield, but his soul power was being sapped at an incredible speed. However, more shadows began to emerge from within the door at this moment. A tremendous shadow suddenly opened up. It was an enormous umbrella, and everything within several tens of square meters was protected within it. Every single soul ray and cannon shell that fell down were all blocked, and the pressure on Shusansha was lifted a little. The Big Dipper umbrella. The Big Dipper Douluo was here. Yes, the commander of the Star Luo Empire's first Soul Master Legion, the Big Dipper Douluo, was also participating in this operation. Give me a set of clothes, third senior brother. Huo Yuhao could feel all the strange gazes that everyone was giving him, and sheepishly asked Shusansha for help. Shusansha chuckled. This wasn't a good time for him to continue teasing Huo Yuhao, as he tossed a warrior robe to him and used his Xuanwu shield to cover him. Huo Yuhao swiftly changed into his new clothes. At this moment, all the titled Douluo and the rest of the Tang sect emerged from the door. The Big Dipper Douluo continued fighting against the incoming assault as he asked Huo Yuhao, "Is this the main peak?" "Yes," Huo Yuhao said, "Be careful, everyone. The death god is on the mountaintop, that red cone-shaped object. If I'm not wrong, the death god must be connected to the Holy Ghost Church, as it contains the ability of evil soul masters. It seems to have been crafted by compressing avenging spirits, and some special powers together. It's extremely frightening, make sure you don't get hit. Avoid the angles that the death god can reach as much as you can as you carry out the mission." "Understood. I can finally have a good fight with these bastards," a tall and burly titled Douluo exclaimed furiously, as he raised his right hand, in which a golden sphere immediately glowed. 2 yellow, 2 purple, and 5 black soul rings rose up as an enormous hammer appeared in this titled Douluo's hands. This large hammer was yellow, and it emanated a dense and heavy aura once it appeared. His title was his martial soul, the Giant Hammer Douluo. The Giant Hammer Douluo swung his arms as the large hammer in his hands crashed ferociously against the mountainside. What was surprising was that his hammer didn't cause any loud explosions as it crashed into the mountain. Instead, a yellow sphere quickly stretched out across the mountain. Huo Yuhao could faintly feel that there was an incredibly formidable strength that was threading through the mountain. Of course, the Giant Hammer Douluo and the Big Dipper Douluo weren't the only ones who began to attack. The other titled Douluo went on the offensive like a bunch of tigers who had been released from their cages. Purple beams stretched across the skies like arrows. These purple beams flickered in the air before they disappeared, and there were no flight trajectories to them, but agonizing cries could be heard in the distance immediately afterwards. How could the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineers know that more than 10 titled Douluo would suddenly appear here? They were caught off guard, and the only things they could use to defend themselves were their automatic protective soul barriers. However, how could automatic soul barriers defend against the attacks of a titled Douluo, who was adept with spatial power? Several dozen soul engineers were impaled by those purple lights, and their bodies broke apart, as they disintegrated into a rain of blood that splattered in all directions. The Star Luo Empire's titled Douluo had been held back long enough. They had felt far too restrained over recent days and weeks. They dared to challenge anybody in the Sun Moon Empire based on their individual fighting strengths, but they could only wait bitterly every day, because they were suppressed by the surveillance from the Sun Moon Empire's soul tools. They couldn't fight even though they wanted to. This was especially so during that instance when 2,000 high-tier soul masters perished, which had dealt a heavy blow to them. Their disciples and relatives were among those who died, and this meant there was now a bloody vendetta they had to exact against the Sun Moon Empire. How could they control themselves now that they were suddenly deep within enemy lines? They couldn't be bothered with the threat from the death god anymore. All they wanted to do was spill the blood of their enemies. An intense tremor suddenly rippled within the mountain. The entire mountain trembled as deafening booms crackled inside the mountain, while a large region caved in on the mountaintop. The Giant Hammer Douluo is so powerful. Huo Yuhao's eyes glowed. These people are so powerful. Senior Giant Hammer, you can attack something a distance away through the air. The giant hammer Douluo nodded and said, I'm going to crush them. But I can't see them, so my attacks are a little inaccurate. But I can see. Huo Yuhao laughed. He shared his spiritual detection with the giant hammer Douluo, and immediately marked out the important positions on the mountaintop for him. They were still relatively far from the death god's location, but they were close enough to some of the mountain's defensive soul tools. Fantastic ability. The giant hammer Douluo gave Huo Yuhao a thumbs up as he swung the large hammer in his hands once more. The other titled Douluo swiftly dispersed over the mountain, and those titled Douluo, who were adept with spatial power, unleashed their abilities to their fullest extent. Huo Yuhao had to gather his strength for a moment after that hit he had taken. Afterwards, he witnessed an elderly man, who was in his 60s, erupt with purple light as his 8th soul ring, a black one, glowed at the same time. This elderly man closed his hands in front of his chest before he pushed them out gradually as a purple whirlpool that was about 10 centimeters in diameter flew out. This titled Douluo was known as the Shattered Star Douluo. He was one of the 2 transcendent Douluo amongst all the other titled Douluo, and he was at rank 95. His martial soul was very unique, the light of shattered stars. A single purple beam appeared on his body when his martial soul was awoken when he was 6 years old. This beam shattered everything it touched, and the light of shattered stars was a name that he had chosen for himself. His martial soul was unique, and was innately full of soul power. He was only 66 years of age today, but he had already become a transcendent Douluo. He was one of the Star Luo Empire's most powerful titled Douluo. His light of shattered stars was equipped with spatial powers. More accurately put, his martial soul was equipped with destructive spatial powers, and was very fearsome. Shattered Star Whirlpool. The tiny purple whirlpool flew out, and paused momentarily in mid-air before the air surrounding it billowed like a hurricane. Intense purple light seemed to swallow even the space around it, and this whirlpool expanded continuously as cracks appeared in the space around it as they merged continuously. All the incoming soul rays and cannon shells seemed to be pulled by some unseen force, and flew into the purple whirlpool before they were diced into a million pieces. Those cannon shells couldn't even detonate, as the purple whirlpool seemed like it was absorbing the energies from those soul rays and cannon shells as it continued to expand. Those titled Douluo's movements became much more casual, with the Shattered Star Whirlpool protecting them as they quickly dispersed. With the help of Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection, they avoided the threat from the death god as they scattered in all directions. Boom! A series of vigorous explosions rang out near the mountaintop. An enormous offensive soul tool that had been constructed on the mountain was shaken and slanted to one side, and it was clear that it could no longer be used. That was probably caused by the giant hammer Douluo. That wasn't all. The giant hammer Douluo was guided by Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection. As he swung his hammer once more, and explosions boomed again and again. The giant hammer Douluo wasn't the most powerful amongst the titled Douluo in terms of strength, but his abilities were most effective in terms of assaulting fortified positions. The Shattered Star Whirlpool quickly expanded to over 50 meters, because of the Sun-Moon Empire's ferocious onslaught, and it was still growing. Huo Yuhao could feel the tremendous energies contained within this terrifying whirlpool, because of his spiritual detection. He knew that this thing would cause a cataclysm once it exploded. The Shattered Star Douluo turned around and gestured to Huo Yuhao and the others to come closer to him. Huo Yuhao, Tang Wutong, and the rest of the Tang sect, along with the giant hammer Douluo, arrived next to him. The other titled Douluo had already dispersed into the darkness. The Shattered Star Douluo formed a sphere with his hands as his palms carried beams of his light of shattered stars. These lights congregated in mid-air before they quietly flowed into the mountain in front of him. The tough rock melted like ice and snow in front of the light of shattered stars. Gentle purple hues along with specks of starlight enveloped everyone as they burst into the mountain with a flash. The Shattered Star Douluo is so powerful. Huo Yuhao was full of admiration inside. The Shattered Star Douluo's abilities allowed him to forcefully break through defenses, and also allowed him to go deep within enemy lines from far away. However, when they didn't have any intel at all, he would be blind even if he could burrow into the mountain. The Sun-Moon Empire would have their own solutions for underground surveillance, and that was the reason why the Star Luo Empire didn't dare to be hasty about this. Even so, Huo Yuhao was full of respect and admiration for all those titled Douluo from the Star Luo Empire. They were the Star Luo Empire's main pillars of strength. The reason why they couldn't do anything about the Sun Moon Empire's defensive perimeter was because of the gap between the two nations' soul tool technology. The Star Luo Empire could match the Sun Moon Empire in terms of individual fighting strength, and they could even have a chance against the Holy Ghost Church. Everything around them descended into darkness, and even Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection was severely weakened by the thick rock around them. However, they were already inside the mountain, and he didn't need to detect a large area. Huo Yuhao didn't need the shattered star Douluo to remind him, as he pointed his spiritual detection in the direction of the death god. The only way to eliminate the greatest threat against the Star Luo Empire's army was to destroy the death god. It wasn't long after they went deep into the mountain that the shattered star whirlpool, which had already grown to almost 100 meters in diameter, suddenly exploded as countless purple lights that were charged with destructive spatial power erupted in all directions. Several dozen soul engineers, who were relatively closer, were immediately torn to pieces, along with their soul tools. A large crack appeared in space, and this crack contorted again and again. It couldn't close up for the moment. The other soul engineers were attacking with full force in attempts to dispel these broken spatial pieces, but how could that be done so easily? They didn't grasp the profundity of space, and they were just attacking with their own strength. There was nothing they could do against these cracks. They could only wait for them to close on their own. The shattered star whirlpool had achieved its aim, and by the time those cracks in space vanished completely, the titled Douluo that Huo Yuhao had unleashed from inside his spectral demiplane were nowhere to be seen. Large numbers of soul engineers landed on the mountain, and everyone's faces couldn't be any blacker. They didn't even figure out how many enemies they were facing. Everyone believed that only one of their enemies had managed to reach this place when Huo Yuhao was first discovered by relying on some strange concealment abilities. However, Tang Wutong appeared immediately afterward, and one became two. Huo Yuhao took a direct hit from the death god, and was dead in everyone's eyes. Tang Wutong relied on her peculiar strength to charge onto the side of the mountain, so didn't that mean they only had one enemy left? However, the giant hammer Douluo and the shattered star Douluo's series of attacks told these soul engineers that they had more than one enemy, and their enemies possessed the strengths of titled Douluo. But the gap in the side of the mountain had closed up by the time they managed to reach it. There was no way they could find them, and even if they knew the position that Huo Yuhao and the others had disappeared in, were they actually going to bombard their own main peak? There were still so many soul tools on it. The shattered star Douluo gradually climbed the mountain from inside with Huo Yuhao's guidance. The rock inside the mountain was tough, but was broken apart continuously before the light of shattered stars. You have to be careful. The person who controls the death god is likely to be the Sun Moon Empire's #1 soul engineer, the death god Douluo. There should also be other people with him. The shattered star Douluo nodded and said, "My abilities are more effective in group battles and destruction. I will hold them back when we exit later, and you guys will destroy the death god as fast as you can. You don't have to destroy it completely. Our army can charge in as long as it has lost its effectiveness." All right. Huo Yuhao held his spiritual detection upward and swept in the death god's direction. However, he was surprised once more, as an intense and sharp pain appeared once again when his spiritual power neared the death god. Huo Yuhao retracted at once, this time with his previous experience. He didn't attempt to go any deeper, and his expression changed a little. They were coming closer and closer to the surface. "Let's stop for a while. I have to brief everyone about the situation up top," Huo Yuhao said to his companions. The shattered star Douluo paused and glanced at Huo Yuhao. The inside of the mountain was dark, but he could still see very clearly with the light of shattered star's radiance. Everyone from the Tang sect was following behind them. Huo Yuhao lowered his voice and said, "Based on the intelligence gathered from my previous reconnaissance attempts, I've roughly figured out the death god's abilities. I don't yet understand what principle the death god was created on, but its destructiveness should have been created based on two things. First, it relies on high temperature and high pressure soul power, but this strength is not that much different from typical class 9 soul tools. At most, it is comparatively a little stronger, and its power is similar to the star sky Douluo Yi Yulin's sun-moon divine needle. However, the death god contains another frightening power, and this power is the key, and that is the power of avenging spirits. Avenging spirits. Huo Yuhao nodded and said, when I attempted to investigate the death god several times before, I felt an intense burning pain every time my spiritual power neared the death god. This was the result of my spiritual power being suppressed. The spiritual power that suppressed me is both tremendous and terrifying, and it is charged with vigorous destructiveness, along with deep resentment. If I'm not wrong, this power comes from avenging spirits, and these avenging spirits are being compressed by some unknown force into something frightening called the force of vengeance, before it's fused with the death god's own high-temperature, high-pressure soul power. This is how the light of the death god is formed. The light of the death god takes two forms. First, it can take a complete form, which was its form when it murdered 2,000 of our soul masters. That form combines both soul power and the force of vengeance. Its other form purely uses its force of vengeance. I took a hit from it before this, and I felt as if my spirit, my spiritual sea, and my body were being torn apart by that frightening vengeful power. I only managed to survive, because there's a special protective force on my body. Avenging spirits. Are you saying that the death god is likely to have a powerful evil soul master near it? The shattered star Douluo was a veteran, and he quickly read between the lines and understood what Huo Yuhao was trying to say. Huo Yuhao nodded solemnly and said, therefore, everyone has to be careful when we go out later. Gai, we'll have to rely on your powers after this. I will try my best to help you, as your holy abilities will have the best dispelling effects against all kinds of avenging spirits. Wutong, your soul power also contains the element of light. I will cover you guys. Alright, Yi Gai and Tang Wutong acknowledged at the same time. Huo Yuhao nodded at the shattered star Douluo. The shattered star Douluo turned towards the giant hammer Douluo and said, you take point, hammer. Alright, the giant hammer Douluo swung his hand to gesture everyone to move away before he spun his enormous hammer. His soul rings flickered continuously, as he hammered against the mountain again and again. The entire mountain quickly began to tremble, as vigorous booming sounds rang out on the mountaintop. They were inside the mountain, but they could still hear the intense explosions on the outside. The destructive strength of a titled Douluo's all-out strike was extremely terrifying. The giant hammer Douluo's abilities were unleashed to their greatest potential at this moment. At this moment, Huo Yuhao's expression suddenly changed greatly. His figure flashed before he charged in front of the giant hammer Douluo. He dragged his body as he rapidly tried to fly invertedly. A streak of dark red light pierced across at this instant. This streak of light was as thick as a water vat. When it swept past, everything around it was vaporized, and a large hole was all that was left over. Following that, an unprecedented and terrifying flow of origin energy was unleashed from that large hole instantly. Pathetic screams filled the air, and formless, avenging spirits started leaping towards everyone. The shattered star Douluo pushed his right hand forward, unleashing the power of shattered stars that tore both space and these avenging spirits apart. However, these avenging spirits were very powerful. Some of them survived the attack. Bright golden light flashed at this moment, and a holy aura was immediately released. The avenging spirits dissipated the moment they were exposed to this light, which was filled with a holy aura. Yi Gai lifted her right hand, and a white sword that was roughly a meter long appeared. It exuded burning, holy white light. It was her holy sword. However, her holy sword was only her fifth soul skill, and she was only a soul emperor. Compared to the shattered star Douluo's light of shattered stars, her soul skill was much weaker. However, her holy sword was extremely effective against the avenging spirits. Its effectiveness even surpassed that of the light of shattered stars. Huo Yuhao said to the shattered star Douluo, quick, let's go up quickly. It's too difficult to move within these mountain walls. He has already discovered our position. If he unleashes his full power, we're done. He clearly knew that the giant hammer Douluo's attack earlier had exposed his position. However, he was the only one whose position was exposed. This was why only a streak of the light of the death god was unleashed towards him. If it were the complete version of the light of the death god, they would have been completely engulfed. If not for the fact that the power of the light of the death god was greatly drained during its release, he might have been the only one who would survive the attack. However, this was also built on the premise that Di Qian was able to resist the attack. The giant hammer Douluo and shattered star Douluo wore a dismal expression on their faces right now. The shattered star Douluo released intense, purple light from his body, which turned into light strips that engulfed everyone and protected them. He took a step forward, and large plots of spaces started to collapse. Then, he carried everyone as they quickly charged out. At this point, booms started to resonate from outside. The titled Douluo, who were mainly concentrated around the main mountain peak, made their moves. Even if they faced Soul Engineer legions, they were able to hang on for some time. Moreover, they didn't have any misgivings right now. They scattered. Against the Sun Moon Empire's Soul Engineer legions, they started to unleash their destructive soul skills. It was easier to destroy than to build. At this moment, more than 10 titled Douluo wreaked havoc with whatever abilities they had, causing the main peak of the Mingdo mountain range to descend into chaos. Those large soul tools installed on the mountain peak were completely ineffective. They couldn't be properly aimed at these titled Douluo, whereas the soul engineers from the Soul Engineer legions could only attack using whatever soul tools they had with them. They weren't able to cause any significant trouble against these titled Douluo, who were very swift. The scattered titled Douluo only had one target, the top of the mountain. Their mission this time was to destroy the death god. As long as it was destroyed, the rest of their enemies would be much easier to deal with. Furthermore, it was much more convenient for them to proceed towards any direction from the top of the mountain. This would aid them in causing further damages to their enemies' soul tools. Right now, there were already 2 titled Douluo who were silently creeping towards 2 of the biggest soul tools, under the guidance of Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection. They were both carrying explosive bombs. Boom! A ball of purple light blew apart at the top of the mountain. Following this ball of purple light led everyone from Shrek in their charge towards the mountain. The giant hammer Douluo's earlier strike was very effective. The moment they came out, everyone saw that the 10+ soul tools on the mountaintop had already been blown apart. Many of them were even damaged beyond repair. Huo Yuhao was silently heartbroken. As he was afraid of being struck by the death god, he didn't bring his Starlight Sapphire ring and Starlight Sapphire heart-protecting mirror. Otherwise, he could have collected all these damaged soul tools. Even though they were broken, they were still worth a lot. The death god was far away. The rest were still slightly unaware, but Huo Yuhao, the giant hammer Douluo and shattered star Douluo had very acute senses. Their expressions changed the moment they came out. There was some kind of invisible pressure in the air that was limiting their spiritual senses. Not far forward, the death god was exuding dark red, bloody light that was only visible from close range. It was as if blood was flowing on the death god. There was even a fierce-looking face on it that was howling. What was even more astonishing was that there wasn't even anyone around. No Soul Master Legion was there to protect such an important soul tool. Even those large soul tools that had been destroyed weren't supervised by anyone. Everyone, be careful. The shattered star Douluo lifted his head to look at the death god, and took a step forward. He lifted his light of shattered stars and protected everyone within it. The giant hammer Douluo was even more direct. He lifted his giant hammer and forcefully hammered it on the ground. This time, he didn't even require Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection before he managed to accurately locate the death god's position. The giant hammer Douluo released intense yellow light from his body. After he hammered the ground, his 6th soul ring shone brightly. Behind him, an identical giant hammer started to swing in the air before it also hammered the ground. A loud boom reverberated. The target was naturally the death god. However, it was at this moment that something weird occurred. A layer of thick, blood-red light was released from the death god. It wasn't targeted towards anyone, but was some sort of domain that had been built. The giant hammer Douluo's hammer quickly turned blood red. After this, he groaned before he was flung into the air. A red hammer projection was also deflected from the ground and struck the giant hammer Douluo, causing him to fly several dozen meters away. The expected impact of the giant hammer Douluo's attack wasn't achieved. Whether it was the shattered star Douluo, Huo Yuhao or the rest, their expressions immediately changed for the worse. The giant hammer Douluo was a title Douluo. Although he wasn't a particularly strong title Douluo, he had earned a reputation for himself through his strength. In addition, he was a rank 92 assault-type Soul Master. The weakest title Douluo was still a title Douluo. He actually had the tables turned on him, and was flung into the air. More frighteningly, neither the shattered star Douluo nor Huo Yuhao could figure out where the person who had dealt this blow to the giant hammer Douluo was. The shattered star Douluo's expression immediately changed as they were engulfed by blood-red light. He wasn't able to tear space apart amidst this blood-red light, which greatly restricted his destructive strength. The immense pressure that was placed on him even limited his ability to release his light of shattered stars. Something that was stronger than the shattered star Douluo. Evidently, the blood-red light wasn't unleashed by a soul tool, but a soul master. It was important to know that the shattered star Douluo was rather strong even in the realm of transcendent Douluo. According to Huo Yuhao's judgment, his cultivation was roughly comparable to the martial god Douluo, Xian Lina. He was among the top 5 soul masters in the Star Luo Empire. However, this unknown enemy had already completely restrained the shattered star Douluo before even appearing. What did this mean? This meant that the enemy wasn't just a transcendent Douluo. It also meant that the enemy's cultivation should also be miles above the shattered star Douluo's. It was too terrifying. The death god was most likely controlled by the death god Douluo. Did this mean that the death god Douluo was a transcendent Douluo? Did this mean that the death god could possibly be a class 10 soul engineer? The destructive strength of a class 10 soul engineer was unimaginable. I wondered who was able to breach my spiritual barrier. Turns out it's a little fellow who specializes in spiritual power. Just nice. My death god pagoda still lacks a powerful spirit to hold the fort. I'll adopt the few of you then. A figure slowly walked out of the blood-red light. Yes, this figure appeared out of thin air. When she appeared, the surrounding air evidently distorted. All the blood-red light supported her as she came into this world. It was a lady, or at least she seemed like a lady from her figure. Her voice was very raucous, and sounded a little raspy. However, there was some kind of special, magical power to it. It made one feel close to her, and even idolize her. Huo Yuhao was slightly petrified, and quickly unleashed his spiritual power to protect the rest. He didn't want the others to be affected by her voice. You are really cautious. But, do I need my spiritual charm to kill all of you? What a joke. She continued stepping forward, and her soul rings started to rise. Everyone was shocked when they saw her soul rings. Her first soul ring was pitch black, and its dark glow showed that it was a 10,000-year soul ring. After this, soul ring after soul ring appeared. Black, 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 red, red and red. 6 10,000-year, and 300,000-year soul rings appeared. Even the shattered star Douluo found it difficult to breathe due to her pressing aura after all her 9 soul rings appeared. This video will end here.